This week on Cloud Security Lab a Week, we're going to take our one account and we're going to turn it into thousands. Well, at least, well, maybe two. Way back in the early days of AWS, when a lot of us were just getting started, we learned pretty early that individual Amazon accounts were a great security boundary. If you think about it, your Amazon account can't see anything in my Amazon account, and my Amazon account can't see anything in your Amazon account. So, from a security perspective, we started actually using different accounts for things like development or testing or different applications. Now, this is like the equivalent of having multiple segregated data centers, but it didn't really cost us anything to actually build it out that way. The other reason, aside from security, we started to do that was that it turns out accounts have actual limits. I know, the cloud's supposed to be infinitely scalable. Maybe it is, but your resources in your account are not. And there's two different kinds of what we call service limits in all of these accounts. In one case, there's limits on the number of resources you can have. By default, I think you're limited to like 5 virtual networks, VPCs in Amazon, and you can get that expanded to hundreds, but not necessarily infinitely. And so if you hit those limits, and these limits are all over the place, then there's nothing you could do, so you would learn to spin out into another account. So we used to do that for better resource allocation. There's also limits on the number of API calls you can make. And we're going to get into that a lot more, probably not for many, many months. But it turns out for any given Amazon service, within a given time period, you can only hit up the API so many times. There's rate limits that are involved. And if you have a lot going on and a lot of complexity in your environment, you might hit rate limits and have failed API calls. So from both a security standpoint and a growth standpoint, and there's also some resiliency benefits, we started to use multiple Amazon accounts, different ones for different application stacks, different ones for development, testing, and production. Now, I think you know where this is going because that was great to define things out for the long term, and you don't have a lot of like resources of different security levels kind of sharing the same operating environment. However, we got to manage all that stuff. And back then, not to spend too much time on a history lesson, there was like no tools to manage that many accounts. Various organizations built their own tools. We started building a lot of open source tooling. It got to be kind of a pretty complicated situation. And it came down to the fact that if you went to multiple accounts, you were increasing your management overhead. Of course, if you stayed in a single account, you would also increase your management overhead. Just identity and access management privileges get really hard to scope down if you have lots of teams working in one account. And it's a lot easier if you have like one team working on one account. So we were doing this. Amazon's like, all right, we need to support our customers. So they came out with a capability called Amazon Organizations. AWS Organizations is a service for managing multiple accounts. Now, this is kind of built in by default on Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud because they started years after Amazon. So people they got the heads up warning about what customers were going to want. But in Amazon, they had to overlay this organizations concept on all of these disconnected accounts. And that's why organizations looks the way it does, which will make sense as we get into it. So the way organizations work is you pick one account and you say, you know what? This is going to be my management account. This is going to be like the root for my entire organization. And you can pick any account to do that. Say, some random lab training environment that you might have just created. What is this, Lab 8? So like 8-9 weeks ago. You can take that account and use that to become your org management account. Then you actually unlock a bunch of additional features. And I'm going to go to the whiteboard now to kind of walk through what that looks like. Where we are today is, as I mentioned, we have our single management account. This is the one that we created. We've been doing our labs in. And I keep mentioning we're going to move into organizations. And you'll notice I haven't taught you how to run like a virtual machine or anything yet, because I think it's so important to get our base infrastructure set up. Like this is the day-to-day bread and butter of a cloud security professional. Okay, we've got our management account that's created. Now, the moment we enable organizations, and it is literally a button that says, I don't know, create org, I think, or create organization. And the moment we check the box in that button, it unlocks these other capabilities. One of them is this concept of an organizational unit. And the organizational unit is a folder you can use to organize other accounts. So accounts will fit within organizational units. Now, you can still have standalone accounts that report directly to the management account, but typically we try and get as much as possible in these organization units. And what I've created here, which is what we're going to be doing as we create, as we work out the rest of our labs, is I've got one for security, I have one for production, I have one for development. Now, there's different ways of organizing these things. I've done this based on what kind of environment it is. It'll make sense why I'm setting it up this way. In other cases, you're going to organize it by business unit. Say, have one for the web team and the consumer team and the whatever team. It doesn't really matter as long as you understand the concepts. You'll figure out what works best for you. And I've been in plenty of places where they kind of blend those concepts together. So an organization unit is a folder for holding the accounts. Now, this is, you get a couple of things when you use an organizational unit. One is you can apply something known as service control policies at the organization unit level. And a service control policy is a special kind of IAM policy that sits outside of the account. And this is how we are able to turn on and off different capabilities using IAM policies for an entire account, as opposed to associating them with an individual user. Service control policies are the biggest security benefit that we actually get from AWS accounts and AWS organizations. These are really, really powerful, very important for managing and implementing security at scale. We're going to get to SCPs within the next few labs and start using them. And we're going to keep growing that skill set over time. They're just that important. So using organizations enables service control policies. Those can be applied to that OU level. They can also be applied to an individual account level. The other thing that's not well depicted here is OUs can have other OUs. So maybe we have an accounting OU here, and we're going to have a website one here. I'm really bad at making up these fake things. And then we could have individual accounts here underneath those. So organizational units can be nested. And if you apply a service control policy at any one of these levels, it actually cascades all the way down. So it's very hierarchical in terms of how this works. There's other kinds of capabilities we get, such as it makes it easier to aggregate things like single sign-on for identity management, which again is going to be one of those things we do in the next 2 to 3 labs. It allows us to consolidate logs. It allows us to manage certain shared services from Amazon. And we haven't really talked about any of those yet, but we are going to use many of them, like CloudTrail is a great example, or GuardDuty or Security Hub. We are able to actually aggregate those across accounts. We'll go through again all of those as we go because organizations just has tons of great features. All right. So we have our service control policies and we have our organizational units, and then we have our individual accounts. Now, the way this is enabled is there's 2 different ways that we can add accounts. So one is you can invite an account, and that initiates a handshake operation where whoever owns that account agrees to be in part of your organization. But you actually have to issue the invitation because both sides have to agree for an account to be part of an organization. So that's the invite version. We're not really going to use that in these labs too much. What we're going to use instead is we're going to just create it right from within Amazon Organizations. We're going to do that today. Remember that whole process we went through to set up your first account? It was like a full 30-minute lab with a bunch of lecture and everything else. Today, we're going to create a whole nother account in 8 seconds or less. It's that fast and that easy. You just click a button to create a new account. And once you create that account, then you can actually add it in to whatever organizational units you want. Today, we're going to create one account in a security organizational unit that we're also going to create once we turn on our management account. Now, when I enable organizations, how does it all work? Well, there's 2 other things, different kinds of accounts in your organization. The first one, and the one that we're going to use, is the basically the full feature. So I think it's called all features. And I'm running off memory, not the blog post here, but with all features, it turns on two things right away. It creates two IAM roles in your account. One is a role for the organization's service. This is a special kind of IAM role called a service link role. And what makes a service link role so special is Amazon can change the permissions. Why? Because they're always adding features to things like organizations. So Amazon says, hey, you're going to trust us to manage the permissions for our service. You can see them because the policies are fully visible. And in fact, if you don't like what we're doing, you can rip that role out, or you can even add restrictions to it. Just understand you might be breaking what's underneath. Back history, there was like huge issues. The earlier versions of these, you would actually apply a manage policy to an Amazon role, but then Amazon could never change that policy. So every time they rolled out new features, they'd tell all the customers, hey, update your policy version, please. So, we can actually do what we said we're going to do. Okay. So you get that service linked role. And the other one is you get something known as the org account access role. And I'm just going to say access. That's a role for you to jump into any of the child accounts as full admin. Again, you can restrict it, you can change it. We're going to leave it on, at least in the beginning, and we're going to talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of that. The next piece, the next kind of thing is, as I'm running out of space here, is you can also just have what's known as a consolidated billing. And consolidated billing. And so a consolidated billing account is one where you don't have these roles. So those things aren't available and you're just paying for everything in that account. So you have an account where you're paying all the bills, but you don't have any management of that otherwise. Believe it or not, there's legitimate uses for that. I've actually used that in my own organization a couple of times. You probably don't want to have too many of those. And we'll have that discussion much further down the road. For right now, everything we're going to do is going to be in the all features account. So those are the key points to keep in mind with AWS Organizations. It is an overlay service for managing multiple Amazon accounts. When you enable organizations, you unlock some new features that are very powerful for security. Organization units, the service control policies, and the ability to consolidate other kinds of services for a better shared services infrastructure. You actually also get some abilities within IAM you didn't have before, such as creating rules around allowing things from organizational units or from your org to have access and locking up things from other environments. We get those security benefits, and to enable those, we have two different kinds of accounts. One is the all features, which is anything and everything. The other is consolidated billing, which just rolls up the charges. And then if you are using the all features, there's those two IAM roles, that new kind of service linked role that we haven't really talked about before, as well as the organization account access role, which is one that you can use to jump into those accounts. Obviously, that's very sensitive from a security standpoint, because if anybody gains access to that, they have like full admin access to all of your accounts. And that's why it was so important to lock down the management account and run as little in there as possible so people don't have to use it. And that's all going to be a part of these labs. So let's go ahead and let's start and create our organization. The lab today is actually really quick. It's just a few clicks. We're going to go in, we're going to create the organization, we're going to create an organizational unit, and then we're going to create a new account as part of that OU. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that that account that we create, it still has to have a unique email address. We're going to use our plus addressing. Now, we don't have MFA associated with that because I'm going to show you how to lock that down with the service control policy instead, which is more of what we would use at scale. But if you're sloppy, if somebody already owns your email account where you're sending this, they could take over this Amazon account that has nothing in it, maybe do some crypto mining. So just make sure you're keeping an eye on your email and you don't fall for any phishing scams over the course of the next week before we go ahead and lock that down. So within the Amazon console, if you go up into the upper right-hand corner here, and region won't really matter too much because this is a global service one, click on that arrow and go to organization. This brings us to the organization dashboard, and look, it's just this easy. Let's go ahead and click Create an Organization. We now have an organization. I told you, this is one of those silly fast labs to go ahead and do this. Now you'll notice the structure is set up here. I want to interpret this very briefly. What we have is the root of your organization, and this is your unique identifier for that. That root is the folder that we're going to put our other organizational units within. So this is an organizational unit designation that it's root, and everything has to flow from root. That's going to matter when we apply service control policies in particular. Then we have our existing account. And in my case, I had named my account Cloudslaw when I first created it. And it is highlighted right then and there that it's the management account. You can see my account ID. No, those aren't secrets, but they kind of are secrets. And I probably need to do a supplemental lab on if those are secrets or not. But for my lab purposes, there's no way for me to keep those things secret. So you're going to see that in all my labs. Then there's the email associated with the account. That's something I had blocked out in some of my previous labs, but at this point, it's just not going to be worth it. And truth is it's really isn't much of a security risk because of how I have my email locked down. But please don't spam me. And you'll notice I use that plus addressing, which is something that you're going to need as we go into the next phases. All right. Now we want to create an organizational unit. If I click on the actions here, you'll notice it's all grayed out because I need to tell it where to create that OU. And all of this you can do with command line and APIs. I'm just showing you how to do it in the console because that's where we are in terms of our labs. Just know that you can automate all of this. In fact, when I created 180 plus accounts for my lab environment that I use when I'm teaching incident response, I did all of that via automation scripts, templates I wrote in Python. All right, so I'm going to click on root. Now I can create the actions and you'll see organizational unit, create new. Now, the name that we're going to use for this is security audit. This is going to be where we put our logs and stuff later, which is why I'm calling it security audit. And as we get deeper into these labs, I'm going to explain why we are using the organizational structure that we're using. Actually, I almost made a mistake. It's not the security audit OU. It is the security organization unit. Security audit's going to be the account. So organizational unit name, security, and we create it. Now we have a folder structure, and you can tell by the icons. So we have folder, root, folder, security. There's nothing in that folder or that organizational unit. You can actually see it has its resource identifier with an OU there. And then the account itself, which is our management account. Now we're going to leave our management account under root for a lot of reasons that are going to make sense as we go through. But I now want to click on security and add an AWS account or go under actions and, I guess I have to do it under the add an AWS account link. So the account name we want here, we're going to go with security audit. And as I mentioned, that's where our logs are going to go. Now we have to put a unique email address in. Remember our earlier labs when we said that every single AWS account has to be associated with a unique email. This does not change as we go into organizations. You still have to have a root email associated with that account. The problem is that if you have hundreds or thousands of accounts, how do you manage that? Well, that's where plus addressing comes into place. So I'm going to go rmogul plus slaw audit. And I would suggest picking a name that you can remember at securassist.com. I hope you used like Google or one of the Microsoft options so you could do the plus addressing like I recommended in the earlier labs. Otherwise, this is going to become an issue. This does work for procedural generation. So remember, when I use plus addressing, I don't need to create this email address. My email provider in be it Google or Microsoft or whoever, supports that when I add that plus, that is going to automatically send to my main email address. So I'm going to get everything consolidated in the main email address. When I created my training environment, I scripted all of this. So they're named, training 1, training 2 with whatever the prefix was that I used on there. And I automated that entire process. Next, remember I talked about that organization account access role? Well, this is where you could change that name. Do not change it. You may decide to change it in your own environments because that's a little bit of security by obscurity, which can be helpful. And maybe you have a more standard way of naming it, but for our labs, we're going to stick with the standard name, organization account access role. That way we're all doing the same thing. And as a reminder, I could have clicked on invite and invited an existing account, but for lab purposes, we don't have an existing account. Click create AWS account. Now, when I click that down arrow, whoops, let's go ahead and do a refresh. We submitted the request to create the account. So it's in the process of actively creating it right now. And if I click on role, it looks like it has already finished creation. I'm going to hit refresh on the screen here. There we go. So I have my Cloud S.L.A.W account. Now, reading through this, you'll notice my security audit. Reading through this, remember what I said, you'll notice it's not in that organizational unit. So I'm just going to click on that account. And from here, I can go to account settings, and it's not fully enabled yet. And that's one of the things when you first create your accounts. It can take hours in some cases for all of the features to be enabled. Let me see if I can do this from here. I'm going to click that arrow, click actions, and AWS account. I'm going to move it, and I'm going to put it in my security organization unit. And there we go. So if I go back to all of my AWS organization, I have my root folder where everything is inside of. I have my security organizational unit. You'll notice the naming of it. See how that NA6S ties in with the root? That's just all about embedding the hierarchy and things for how Amazon can keep track of stuff and make it a little easier for us to keep track of things. I have my existing account, the one I'm logged into right now, which is my management account. Then if I click that down arrow, I now have the security audit account created as well. Brand new account ID using that new email that I set up. It's really that simple. A click to turn on orgs, click and some typing to make an organizational unit, and a couple of more clicks and a little bit more typing to create an account and put it inside of that OU. And all of this can be automated and scripted in code. The nice thing is now we are unlocking all of these other security benefits. We have our OUs and service control policies. We're going to enable single sign-on. We're going to actually have different kinds of management accounts for different kinds of services and be able to segregate things out. And we're going to build a skeleton that's going to be just what you would use if you were creating something for a large enterprise. Hope you enjoyed it this week, and we'll see you next week as we start taking advantage of some of these security benefits.